Okay, awesome. So we've got Brian Phillips from Cohen Highley Law Firm here in London joining us today. And we are going, Brian, thank you very much for joining us and agreeing to do this.
Thanks for having me, Matt.
And what we're just going to do today is we're going to kind of hopefully answer some questions that people have and discuss, I guess, from the legal side of things in a real estate transaction, how the world has changed. And so
Sure.
you've been in this profession forever.
A long time.
Long time.
Too
So
long.
you come with a lot of knowledge and wisdom. So how has your industry pivoted during this social distancing scenario that we're in right now?
Well, one of the things that has pleased all of us who do real estate for a living is that the Law Society and the title insurers have agreed that we can do our signing for closings on a remote basis. I mean, I prefer to see clients face to face, of course, who wouldn't? But in this particular circumstance, we can actually put you, if you're a buyer or a seller, on video, watch you sign the documents that we've prepared and sent to you, including witnessing remotely, swearing documents remotely. When you're finished doing all your signing, we get them back from you, and I add my wet signature is a new terminology I've heard recently, as a witness or as swearing a document.
Mm-hmm.
And we send those documents by scan off to the other side. All the lawyers seem to be accepting scanned copies for closing as well, which is helpful. By and large, although it's much less convenient and got its own hassles, that is working fairly well.
Yeah. Did any kind of legislation have to change, or it was always there, just wasn't really something that people enjoyed doing?
You know, I would hazard to say they did a legislative change, but it's possible. I'm not even sure. I take my cue from the title insurers and from the Law Society. The title insurers have basically said they understand the conditions we're all working under, and they're prepared to back everybody up, whether it's a buyer who's been defrauded, heaven forbid, or a lender. So that's really our saving grace for the most part.
Mm-hmm.
And let me just give you an example of my ideal client today, okay, in terms of a purchaser or a seller. And I realize that most people don't meet this grade, because I didn't even until just a week or two ago. So in an ideal situation, I can actually send scans of the original documents to you as a buyer or seller. You have the ability to receive them, print them off, you pile them up in order. Then you and I get online like this and we go through what has to be signed. If you have any questions, I answer them. I watch you actually sign the paper. When that is done, you then scan them back to me. They both come to my assistant and to me. The ones that I have to witness or swear, I sign up, and then I scan them back to my assistant. Difficulty, of course, is a lot of people don't have even a printer, let alone a scanner. So certainly within the city, for example, I have just in the last couple of weeks been running papers around a little bit, as long as I don't have to really be confronting people face to face or whatever. That's going to work pretty well. So we've been a bit lucky. The younger folks tend to have all this equipment and all the ability to do these things, and the older folks often don't. And even for me, I had this situation where my assistant Tony had sent me a document. She said, "Can you please sign this and send it back to me?" I said, "Sure, go ahead and send it." So I went to print it. It was a legal document, and for the life of me, I don't know why we use legal paper, but it was a legal document, so I found I couldn't print it on legal paper without a lot of dicking around. Then when I finally printed it in legal paper and signed it, went to scan it back to her on my new printer scanner, give a poke for Hewlett Packard, and it kept scanning as a letter-size document until I finally figured out. It was about 40 minutes of mucking around with this until I had it right. It would have taken 2 minutes in the office, so we are all certainly being somewhat inconvenienced, but I guess things can always be worse, right?
Why is everything on legal size paper? Is there a reason?
I've been asking myself that question for about 40 years, because especially since we have printers at home now, most people don't bother keeping legal size paper. Why would they? It's only the lawyers.
Yeah.
Whether we're trying to keep a little element of our territory kind of unique in that most people don't have the legal paper, but we've got it, I honestly couldn't tell you. I mean, in this day and age, I'm pretty sure that if you were looking for a document that's normally on legal size paper and I printed it onto letter size, downsized, I think you'd still be happy to receive it. I hope we go that way eventually. And the other thing I'd like to see is, I know you guys have had the pleasure of dealing with DocuSign. What a great program that is. I think for a lot of our documents, we could use DocuSign, and perhaps still with the acknowledgements and direction that actually transfer property and create mortgages, those documents, maybe we'll do the wet signatures with that as we're doing right now remotely.
Yeah.
I think we will make this easier. But again, I'm pleasantly surprised how quickly the title insurers and the law society came through and said, yes, this only makes sense.
So do you think, because I guess everybody is working together, accepting these, new, call it virtual changes, I guess then is this the new norm? Like maybe maybe not, next month, but a year or two down the road, once, the legal bodies can kind of get together and just make sure everybody's comfortable with it. But I guess then will DocuSign or an AuthentiSign, any type of digital signing software, you think that is going to then become more common throughout I guess more so your industry? Because real estate, we've now in Ontario been using it for, I want to say 4 or 5 years now.
The big fear and concern that drives us to say we got to have you sit across the desk from me, bring in your ID, and all the rest is the fear of title fraud. And it's a legitimate fear, of course. There are in the big city in particular. There's lots of cases of it. I'm pleased to say I haven't seen any in London yet, but that may just be luck. Who knows?
Yep.
The reality is that things will change. If this only lasted another few weeks, and that's another conversation topic, but if it only lasted a few weeks, I wouldn't be surprised if we hear from everybody involved in our process, go back to the normal situation, meet face to face. And although in some ways that's the way I'd prefer it, the bottom line is I think we have a good chance of hanging on to some of this. I hope it continues. The thing about title fraud is often I've been around long enough, I'm dealing with clients I've dealt with before. I've been around long enough to know good realtors like yourself who will, have already vetted somebody and gotten to know them and be able to say, yes, this person appears to be legitimate, everything's fine. Or, even watching for, flags of fraud, as they say, like you guys would be a little more probably aware of that. At least you would have been before you stopped being able to do a lot of walkthroughs and house showings.
For sure.
But I think things will change. We're just not sure exactly how yet. I'm just glad they're at least trying to accommodate the situation for the time being.
Mm-hmm. So I guess let's talk from a home buyer's perspective right now. What can they do come, call it leading up to close date, call it within a couple weeks of close date on a property? What can they be doing to help ensure a smooth transaction? I mean, we've all started to hear that, deals are getting more difficult for whatever the reason, but is there anything that a home buyer can do to make the transaction go smooth right now?
Well, probably just thinking about exactly how we have to close deals now. I mean, one of the real big concerns is this issue of title fraud. So for them to take the time to make sure they've got all their identification clearly available.
Are you like driver's license, credit card? Is that?
Yeah, we always want at least one government photo ID, and driver's license is the most common thing we see. Passports are great too, and actually they go to the front of the class if they got a passport and a driver's license, frankly. But having their ID available, making a good, clean, crisp copy to send us ahead of time. Technically, when it comes to the virtual ID, hopefully we have that photocopy in front of us, and as a client, you hold up your ID close to the camera and say, "Here, that's my driver. This is what I've sent you." Mm-hmm. And that is pretty much how we try to guard against not dealing with persons who are defrauding the system and the rest of us. Mm-hmm. So having their ID handy is really good. Making sure, have them go out and buy a printer scanner. That would be just ideal.
I guess, yeah, have a printer with a scanning feature, or if you have one.
Yeah.
And this happened to us. We ran out of ink day 2.
Oh, man.
So you think, well, I don't have to, because we weren't thinking, I'm going to have to print it. No, you still have to print some stuff. And so then of course, now we ordered ink and it got here in 2 days, but still it was.
Yeah, you certainly want a printer that warns you. Now, coincidentally, again, another plug for the Hewlett Packard guys. They have a new system now with they'll offer to send you ink as required. I guess the machine must send information back to HP.
Yeah.
And it's so much per month, depending on whether you want 50 pages, 100 pages, 300, and so on and so forth. I mean, I don't even know what to do right now, except I expect this cartridge to last probably for several months, and I'll just sit tight. But that would be helpful. I mean, I happened to buy this one for about no, $179 on sale. So I mean, you can't go too far wrong. But you know how people are. I mean, you don't want to add any more costs than there already are to their real estate deal.
Yeah.
Now, another thing some clients have done, and this isn't a bad thing to look at, is the Staples people and some of the people that do the printing and scanning and copying and whatever are considered essential, and thank goodness. And we had one client who actually did go to the trouble and go there to get the documents printed, sign them and scan them from there. And realistically, I mean, this is a nice little printer scanner, but I don't know what I would do if I had 30 or 40 pages to scan, or 50 pages, or even 60 like you get sometimes. I think that's where I'll say I'm jumping in the car, getting my mask if I need it, and away I go. But you know, it all depends on so many of the circumstances, who they are. We had a deal just recently where we were acting for the buyers, and the seller is in a nursing home. And you know, when Doug Ford talked about putting the iron ring around the nursing homes, although it sounded kind of good from the point of view of keeping those old folks, we old folks safe, it was also a little frightening to think, well, how do you get them to sign up?
Yeah.
And
how'd you deal with that?
Well, there's two ways. I mean, this one was lucky because there was a power of attorney, so the young relatives are signing this deal up. But I've heard of people actually preparing the documents as per normal, handing them in through the doorway with someone from the home helping, and passing them on to the person who's sitting just inside. Through the window, you can see them sign. That's really all it's about, is seeing them sign, whether through the window or over the internet. That's sufficient for the validation purposes these days. So it is working out that way, but it's being readily available. I mean, I don't know if you've probably run into this over the years, and it still makes me shake my head when you have someone who's, and this is a silly example in this circumstance, but I can recall situations where somebody's buying a place or selling a place, but they've got a 2 or 3 week vacation plan during the sale.
Yeah.
And you say, excuse me, you're not going to.
I haven't seen it in a while, but it has happened, and you just think, what are you thinking?
Thankfully but there is nowhere to go right now. So fundamentally, that's not likely to happen too often. But it still does shock me to this day that there's some people who can do that, and I don't know. It's very odd. Very odd. But be ready with ID. Consider having your printer scanner, or making sure you got ink. Just being sort of ready to receive documents to print, and ideally scan them and send them out. Or we can always still work with courier if we have enough time as well. Like we used to have people in to sign the day before closing, and part of the strategy there was that sometimes there's last minute changes in documents, last minute requirements from lenders, all kinds of things that can happen. But we're now aiming for 3 or 4 days ahead, just to try to deal with this issue of papers back and forth and sending around where we need to go with them. So ideally, just being available, which isn't a big problem today. Having their ID ready to roll, maybe a printer scanner, and keeping in touch. Make sure we have their emails, and ideally more than one if there is more than one. Phone numbers, landlines, cell phones, next of kin, you name it.
Okay. And how about, so then as a seller, is it kind of the same thing, or is there anything extra?
The primary difference between selling and buying when it comes to the legal end is the sell is a little more straightforward, generally speaking. The sort of information we need to get the file moving along efficiently, as most people have mortgages still these days. So if you got a mortgage, we'd like to know who it's with, ideally have a mortgage number, and maybe a phone number to call and contact. It's all about calling them to get a discharge statement, because I'm sure you've had deals ready to close and there's no discharge statement, and it's really virtually impossible to close a sale without being clear on how much is owed to the mortgage lender that's registered against the title. Because you want a discharge statement saying, upon payment of X dollars, we will get rid of this mortgage. Same applies otherwise with ID and printer scanner capabilities, if that's at all humanly possible, and being available. From the buyer's point of view, what the troubles are, of course, more documents, lender's documents, closing one tomorrow where there's a mortgage and a bridge loan. And I'm really interested to see that more and more people are bridging their purchases. That's very helpful for everybody. Not everybody can get away with it in terms of the ability to borrow and what have you, but certainly, if you can get your place purchased and then sell your place a week later, everybody's a lot happier. You got time to tidy the place up, maybe do some decorating, whatever you may need to do. But we still see the odd deal, but not as many where it's purchase and sale closing on the same day. And I think when that happens, it's just being patient, being flexible. Clients always ask me, when are we going to get the keys? And sometimes you're trying to have things delivered, and sometimes you're going to have a moving truck full of furniture. For some reason, the sweet spot, certainly at our office, seems to be between, say, 1 o'clock and 3:30 is, typically when deals will close, and on a really busy day, it could be a little later. And if you got to close a sale first and a purchase after, that can delay things too. All, just
Yeah.
ideally keep the closing day as clear as you can, so you don't, yes, you want your keys at the end of the day and go have a look, but ideally you're not moving a lot of furniture in unless it's late in the day, and ideally you're not having a lot of things delivered, and so on and so forth.
I remember, I want to say, I'm going to say 3 years ago, but it could have been 6 years ago. I feel like somewhere between 3 and 6 years ago, the ability of people to bridge finance became harder. And then really we've only seen it kind of start again as something maybe in the past year. Because I think people are more looking at, no, I need to make this easier, because it's a lot of moving parts.
Yes, you're absolutely right. And I would say that's, without my thinking much about it, that's been my observation as well. I wasn't sort of saying, I wonder why it's not happening that way. But I have speculated over the last several years about, yes, we're not having too many days where they close the purchase and sale on the same day. And from our perspective as lawyers trying to get things done for people, that's certainly a much better experience for everybody, because it's such a panic when you're trying to close your sale before you can close a purchase. It's going to be 3:30 in the afternoon. Something's been holding up your sale because the buyer's got a mortgage situation where they've not been authorized to release funds yet, or they've not even got the funds yet, or who knows what could happen. But yeah, that's interesting. Times.
How about from like, as a realtor, how can my industry make it easier for people like you, for the lawyers, to get things done? I mean, is it, like, because you were saying, like, there's the day of close, there can be a lot of moving parts, getting keys around, different paperwork. Like, is there anything extra as a real estate industry that maybe we should be looking at doing or considering doing to help make it smoother for the client?
Yeah, well, when we're dealing with an experienced realtor like yourself, we generally find it runs very smoothly. And thank you, by the way, for being available, you guys, your colleagues, to run the keys a bit around now on the closing day. That's been very helpful, since most of us are working from home. Like, I'm at my house, my assistant's at her house, and we've got 100 people from our London office who are just working from home. We're trying to keep the office clear and clean of people. But the thing we run into occasionally, and it can be just someone who's not paying attention, is when we don't have all the contact information for the client. We might get an offer without knowing how to get a hold of them exactly, or not having really good information about how to get a hold of them. And in this day and age, ideally, you get more than one piece of information: a phone number, email, and so on and so forth. We have at our office, we've got an initial email that we send out that has way too much information in it, telling people what to expect, what's going to go on, all the talk about moving parts. It's full of moving parts, and I'm giving some thought to trying to edit it somewhat, or at least maybe this. The one thing I think I might start doing that I should have done some time ago is at least calling the client right off the bat and saying, listen, you are going to hear from one of our assistants. You're going to get a detailed email. If you're the type of person that loves those detailed emails, go to it and go through it in detail. Have fun with it. But I know it sometimes tends to worry some people. For example, we have a little blurb on surveys and whether or not there's a survey for the property. I mean, the title insurers kind of did away with the residential survey business probably about 25 years ago. And trying to find a survey these days is pretty rare. You might have to find a new home with one, because they need that to present to City Hall before they put the sticks and bricks on top of the foundation. But if I've had any calls about our initial email, it's mostly about, geez, do we need a survey? And I think for a lot of people, they go over these emails fairly quickly without reading them carefully. Lawyers drafted this, so trust me that it's really precise and accurate. But let's recognize how people do business these days. I say, and I'm going to probably make some adjustments to that. Maybe even I'll send a preliminary email saying, hey, you're going to get a much lengthier email.
So, and this is, we had a recent deal together that, a survey kind of, confused. I'm just going to say confused all of us, because we were just all confused. But how valuable is a survey these days? I think that's actually an interesting, to me, that's an interesting question.
Yeah, well, it's an excellent question. Thank you. Because I can recall going to seminar, sorry. I went to a seminar years ago that was thrown by the surveyors. It was really interesting because they were there to say, listen, guys, let's be clear on what surveys are all about. Your job as a lawyer is to confirm that A sold to B, sold to C, sold to Matt, and therefore Matt can now sell to you or your client. And he said, but when it comes to what is Matt selling, it's the surveyor's job to make clear what Matt is selling.
Mm-hmm.
So they went on to present a really interesting example. They showed that classic builders survey, which is done for the city. So it just shows typically the foundation of the property.
Yeah.
And the builder runs off to City Hall with it and say, see, I put this house on the lot where it should be. Please give me my permit to build the rest of the house. So they said that's what a lot of you rely upon on an ongoing basis to say, looks like it's all fine. It's got the right side yards, setback from the street, percentage of lot coverage, all these things that the city's supposed to look after. So we would think we're in good shape using that. And then they said, now here's a survey that was done 2 years later. The driveway got installed 2 feet onto the neighbor's property. The fences were all off the lot lines. They'd put an addition on that made it questionable whether or not they're covering too much of the lot, and so on and so forth. It was almost frightening. So the title insurers have come along and said, look, guys, we're trying to make certain parts of what you do here a little bit easier. So what we'll tell you is that if your client runs into a problem with the location of their house on the lot that they didn't know about and that would have been disclosed by a current survey, we'll find some kind of solution. Now it is it's an insurance solution, so it's never perfect, but it's a lot better than not knowing what the heck to do. So
mm-hmm.
by and large, as a consequence of their coverage for survey issues, most people don't bother with a survey. We used to scramble looking for them years ago and try to find something, but these days people don't worry so much. Now, my personal
that's just because we have title insurance.
Yeah.
Which, how much is 150?
It's a floating fee based on the value of the house these days.
Okay, makes sense.
And it used to be when it first came around many years ago that the cost of the title insurance was actually not much more than, if even sometimes less than, the cost of ordering all the certificates from City Hall. We used to order like a zoning certificate, a building inspection certificate, and on I could go. We paid about $285 at the peak for these things. And the problem was that a building inspection certificate, a zoning certificate, still had to be analyzed against the survey information if you could find it. A building inspection certificate would only have record of things that came to the city's attention. So it wasn't as if it was saying the city says the house is fine. It's just saying they're not aware of any problems. Mm-hmm. So it really was no real protection anyway. But it was something we classically got on these closings. And when we first started, the cost of getting those certificates and the cost of having title insurance was almost the same. And in my view, the title insurance was a better coverage because they would find a solution when a problem came up. The type of problem would be, for example, I went to sell a house a few years back, and the buyer's lawyer checked for outstanding building permits. This is something we don't actually have to check anymore because the title insurer says, look, if your search for a building inspection certificate or building permit would have shown an outstanding permit, we'll find a solution. And so the lawyer acting for this particular buyer was offered, okay, what we'll do is we will insure over that. Our title insurer will give you a policy for title insurance saying that if there's ever a problem with that outstanding building permit, they'll look after it. Well, they drew the line in the sand and said, no, we're not accepting that. We don't want this. We want this thing fixed. And the title insurer that our client had fixed it. They basically did what they got the city in to inspect, and they took on whatever work they had to do to fix things up. And in the end, everybody was happy. Mm-hmm. And that's where title insurance, that's the type of thing title insurance can help with. Okay, for sure, among many other things.
Yep.
Yeah. So I don't know if I got way off topic there.
No, I think so. I mean, at the end of the day, sorry.
I'm sorry. The point I really wanted to make was, if you come to me and say, Brian, I'm buying this particular house, do you think I should have a survey? I'd probably say, well, does it look like the house is situated well in the lot? Does the good side yards, if it looks like something that's pretty much a normal, like a modern 1980, 1975 on subdivision, you can pretty well count it being in pretty good shape. Mm-hmm. On the other hand, if it's the core of the city, you'll find that, sometimes houses are built 1 or 2 feet onto the next door neighbor's actual lot, and or if the properties are really close, I may say, listen, if this is of concern to you, you might consider getting a survey. If you want to put an addition on the back of the house, and it's really important to you to do that, you might want to get a survey. Now, the title insurers will also say to you, we can insure over that risk as well. But I think once you set those wheels in motion, likely they're going to want to get whatever information they can to satisfy themselves that they're not taking a really hot risk, shall we say. So that's sort of generally speaking my view on should you get a survey, what are surveys all about, and how does title insurance help us to not have to be so concerned about surveys.
Interesting. How have lenders been during social distancing? What does that look like? How have lenders been?
Oh, lenders.
Like in this, like, are they accepting of all the changes that have been going on?
Well, I was just at the bank, or one of the banks yesterday, and picking up a draft, and they actually seem to be observing the normal sort of, rules and regulations. I didn't get too close to them. They handed it to me very gingerly.
That's funny.
So I haven't heard any complaints myself from clients having problems dealing with the banks, but I presume that you guys probably are a little bit more closer to the action than we are there, because you're the guys that say, have you got your mortgage?
Yeah, what we're hearing on our end is there's, for a short period of time, and I don't know, I mean, like, what's right, what's wrong, who knows? There was a short period of time when everybody was scrambling to get virtual, to get virtual work from home,
right?
Where they kind of threw the rules out the window for a bit. They weren't calling employers. They were just, no, keep it going, because, IT departments were overworked because servers were blowing up, because, for every which reason. And then what we've heard now is things are getting back to scrutinizing more, but even more so, because, I mean, there are people out there who, I mean, I had a job last month. Now I don't have one right now.
Right.
Obviously, if you're in the middle of a real estate deal, correct me if I'm wrong, but just about every lender has the ability to pull financing up until the day of, based off of pages of conditions that are in their documents.
I think you're pretty much right on the money. It's a little bit frightening when you really think about it. Wouldn't take much for a lender to say, we're concerned now, we're not going ahead. And of course, when you think how deep their pockets are to hire lawyers to fight a lawsuit versus any of us, you're just in trouble. We haven't seen too much of that yet, but getting back to what realtors can actually do to sort of help us out. Here's one thing that comes to mind, and that is certainly where conditions, well, whether or not there's conditions, kind of monitoring the financing from that point of view. We had one the other day where a very generous relative agreed to help a young lad purchase his first home, and they were dealing through a broker for the mortgage, and got a commitment of some description, which I've never actually seen, but there are the banks, the trust companies, and the big credit unions, and then there are what I'd call B, C, D, E, and F lenders, and I think you're probably familiar somewhat with how they get their score.
Yep.
From a legal point of view, often it's what kind of torture do they put us through to get the money, and how often do they jerk the client around, and so on and so forth. But God bless them, because they keep the banks honest. The rates are what they are, like the poster rate and the actual rate to lend to you are so much different thanks to those B, C, D, and E lenders, so don't want to be too hard on them.
Yeah.
But in this case, 2 weeks ahead of closing, I get notified that not only has the young lad been given a layoff notice, but so has his relative who's guaranteeing the mortgage. Well, actually going on the title with it, which we can talk about too. And the first thing I said was, look, you got to let the lender know. I said, it really is problematic. So I got a hold of the realtor in that case and asked her to please, shepherd them through the process to try to make sure that they're making it clear to the broker that we're acting in that case for the borrower and the lender, and we can't keep any secrets either direction. So
I have a question with that.
Yeah.
It's, you have to tell them, or like, I don't know, I'm going to throw out the word fraud, but I'm not sure if it's really fraud. I guess, is it misrepresentation if you don't?
I don't know what lawyer could in good conscience hear that news and not say to the client, look, I have to share it
Yeah.
with your lender. I need to know the lender knows, and they've said they want to go ahead anyway.
Yeah. Well, because otherwise I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but you're then actually putting your livelihood in jeopardy.
Yeah.
Like,
Reputation, livelihood, you name
yeah,
it. I mean,
everything. It's
it's
just
just
wrong.
wrong.
It would be just
And,
wrong. Yeah.
yeah, it's just wrong. And I'm sure there's the odd mortgage broker out there who either doesn't really understand, certainly newer ones in particular, or never been confronted by it before, think things are all going to be okay and it'll all work out. But that's the reality. Now, the funny part is I could say to a client who's determined to try to push ahead anyway, I could say, well, look, here's one solution. You fire me and you hire some other lawyer,
Mm-hmm.
and you don't tell them. Now,
Yeah.
does that make me a party to their fraud
I
process?
mean,
I wouldn't even want to go there.
no, right? Like, it's still, yeah. Who knows? But
Yeah, no, it's a tough one, but uh, everybody just has to do their part. But because the next interesting question, like I've heard a few people ask me, well, can I get out of this deal? And it's a question that's still being kicked around. And frankly, I talk to our dark siders. I call litigators in our firm. Well, all litigators, dark siders in the
yep.
Vader vein. And basically, the dark siders say their knee-jerk reaction was, you know what? It doesn't sound like something that would excuse your performance of the contract, whether you're a buyer or a seller. It's more a question for the buyer. Right? The buyer says, I've got this problem. I've lost my income. I can't get my mortgage.
Mm-hmm.
Or some buyers, we've been through that seller's market where people made a firm offer, but they still have to sell their house. And like, imagine making a firm offer on a place before this crap hit the fan, and then you still haven't sold your place.
Oh yeah, and there are people out there that
people like that, yeah.
Yep.
Very worrisome. So the sort of knee-jerk reaction from the litigators was, no, it's probably not going to excuse you from performance. You probably just have to either figure out a way to do it or take your lumps. If they have to resell and lose some money and carry it for a period of time, you're probably liable for that. Not very pleasant. Now there's other opinions, and likely what'll happen is 2 or 3 years from now we'll know what the answer is when these things work their way through the courts and even the Court of Appeal.
Yep.
To see, I mean, we've not seen anything like this in our lifetime.
No.
I hope we never see it again. And I hope there's not a reoccurrence again late in the fall or early winter.
Well, no, because I mean, they're throwing that idea around, and I do believe, and I don't want to get too into it, but I do believe I read something where in China right now they're saying they're having a second wave, and so it's I was watching a podcast. Are you familiar with who Ray Dalio is?
Ray Dalio?
Ray Dalio. He's the founder of Bridgewater. He's
okay, Bridgewater I know of, but
yeah. So he's in like the top 50 wealthiest Americans. And in this podcast, they're trying to get out of him what does this look like in the end? And he's kind of had the best comment that I've ever heard. And he says, no one knows, but he says, it will be good as long as we can all understand that we get out of this and come out the back end in a much better way if we treat each other a certain way. And it was, when you hear that from, somebody who, call it net worth of $20 billion. I mean, they generally you wouldn't think they would sound like that, but he's like, that's all that matters. It's how do we treat each other.
Someone who can afford to be a jerk.
Right. Because normally we would think that they would just be like, oh, this is an opportunity. I want pennies on the dollar for things. And he just said the most important thing right now is how do we treat each other? He's like, if you have a neighbor who lost their job and they need groceries, well, you might need to buy them groceries.
Yeah.
And I was floored by it. I couldn't believe it. I was like, I can't believe this guy's saying this, because it's what needs to be said.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's good. Very good point. I'm pleased to hear people thinking that way. We are seeing a lot of good. A lot of good people are coming up to the plate. Now there's others who are a bit knuckleheaded about it, and for some of them, they may just even in this day and age, this information day and age, it's possible they still don't really get it or know what's going on.
Yep.
If you don't have cable, for example, you certainly don't get a lot of local news or even necessarily national news, other than whatever Google prints or you see somewhere else in MSNBC or whatever the case may be. But anyway, it's hard to imagine at this late stage that people don't get it, but
Mm-hmm.
maybe the excuse for some of them still.
Anything else going on right now that you want to talk about? Any other good advice you can give to people?
Oh, well, this is kind of a morbid piece of advice.
All right, let's hear it. I love it.
Well, the business of remote signing has also been extended to the business of doing your wills.
Oh.
Yeah, and that was a real shock to me. It's interesting because the deal is when you sign your will, ideally you're signing in the presence of two witnesses who see you sign it and sign it in your presence. Like, so everybody gets, the three of you get in the room and nobody leaves until everybody's signed. That's the traditional way in which wills are to be signed. Now, this may have taken some regulation change. I just haven't bothered to inquire, but we've been given the green light to say, you know what, we can do it remotely, much like the real estate deal. So I could literally see you. I presume another witness could watch you sign your will, and you're from three of us on Zoom or whatever. Sign your will, and then later affix our signatures to a copy as well, and it's going to be considered valid now.
Mm-hmm.
The idea behind the old system was that, well, they go so far as take your camera and zoom it around the room to reassure us there's nobody standing in the corner pointing a gun at your head and saying, "You sign this or else."
Really?
But somebody pointed out, well,
if you got to prove it, right?
Well, yeah, but I mean, there's probably more subtle ways to threaten people than just having a gun in a room. So, sometimes we go a little too far.
Yep.
Like I have what I call the mom and pop style will, and I still have that kind of will. I'm dead and gone. It all goes to my wife. We're both dead and gone. Our two kids get to divide it up. Mm-hmm. Heaven forbid one of them should predecease us. In that case, it would go to any children they have. So that's this. It's called the stirpidal or bloodline distribution. It's a mom and pop will. We're a small family still, so we also have what I call the disaster clause. And the disaster clause is saying, all right, if we're all wiped out, and hopefully it wouldn't happen, but then hopefully it's a rare opportunity for that to happen. We were actually all in a big van about 2 years ago in January in a warm place, and I thought,
and you started talking about this.
But the disaster clause there to say, okay, what happens if we're all gone?
Yep.
And I'll digress to point out what that's all about. My wife and I had a discussion about this years ago, and she said, well, it was just the two of us, so of course it's a lot easier to anticipate a disaster. We're in a car, get run over by a Mack truck, it's all over. So she said, well, what do most people do? And I said, well, for most people, it's half to one side of the family and half to the other. And she immediately said, like, she's a bright woman, she says, well, that's not fair. So I thought, okay, what have I overlooked? I'm thinking, what have I overlooked? And she says, I've got 7 siblings, you've only got 2. On a per capita basis, your family make out like bandits. And I couldn't help myself. You know how it is, and you've been married for long enough. I had to say something smart, and I said, well, it's not my family's fault that your family's Catholic. Thankfully, the room where the discussion took place had 2 exits. So as we were leaving the room by separate exits, I think I hollered in my head, I'll look after my family, you look after yours. And then I thought about it. I thought, geez, you know what? We get hit by the Mack truck. They roll right over top as we're both dead. And they say, if you can't tell who died first, and I could have this presumption mixed up, and it doesn't really matter that much, but I think the presumption is the oldest died first. That's me, okay? Only a few months, but older. So they say, okay, Brian, we're going to assume that you died. Your separate estate goes to Loretta. Now, the whole thing goes to her side of the family. Now, I don't know what comes next, if anything. But if we do see each other in some next existence, the last thing I want to hear from my people when they arrive at the pearly gates, I may be outside them, but at least I might see them there, is, what kind of lawyer were you anyway? It all went to her side of the family. So I call that the disaster clause. And again, a mom and pop will, it's a very simple thing. Everything to the spouse, then to the kids, grandkids, great-grandkids, great-great-great-great-grandkids, and then maybe the disaster clause. And that's where the fun comes. And I still have some clients now that I haven't heard from in probably 2 or 3 years who haven't figured out the disaster clause yet. And you should never let that hold up your planning.
Yeah.
But again, the simple news is that you can sign remotely. So for anybody who's really worried to the point they want to have this piece of their business affairs in order, it can be done.
Yeah. Interesting.
Yeah.
Anything else changing out there then with?
Those are the dramatic changes. Yeah. Nothing else comes completely to mind. Like everything else that we see now is just the same stuff we're all sort of suffering through in terms of how we have to live our lives right now. And it's not much fun, but The worst part is not seeing family, right? I mean, I
Yeah.
haven't seen my grandson face to face in 5 weeks,
Yeah.
and my son and daughter, and the borders closed. Or Jessica's in Wisconsin,
Yep.
so we can't even go there, even if we were wanting to
Yep.
take the road trip.
We went and saw my parents outside for my father's birthday last weekend. We had cake and soup on the driveway and stayed about 15 feet apart, and it was weird, but
Now tell me this. Loretta has the theory that seeing someone even 6 feet away creates a different, I presume, better brain chemistry than even FaceTime and Zoom and whatever.
I think there's something to be said by, yeah. Like this is nice, but I think in reality, yeah, it felt nice because we hadn't seen them in, I mean, a month, right?
Yeah.
And it's weird, especially like, I mean, it's not weird if they lived on the other side of the planet. You'd be used to it by now. But when you're in the same city, there's kind of this weirdness where you're like, we haven't seen each other for a long time.
I feel most badly trying to explain it to the young kids. I mean, I don't know what you tell your children. You can't run and hug grandma or grandpa. It's like, what? And then you have to hopefully call that off at some point in time and say, why is it safe now?
Yeah, I will say this, and it's more so in the past week. So, I mean, our Gavin's 6.5, Ethan's 2.5. So pretty young. I mean, Ethan kind of really doesn't get anything, but Gavin, he's
starting to catch on.
He's starting to catch on. But you can tell that there is some form of, I don't know if it's really, I guess there's some form of an emotional strain going on because he can't interact with his friends. I mean, and we'll try and FaceTime, and he does have friends who live next door, so they'll yell through the fence, but you can tell that it's starting to take its toll on him, where his moods are getting very different. He's upset a lot more, and it's not just like upset because it's like, I can't have a chocolate bar for breakfast. It's upset that, like, you can almost see like he feels trapped because it's like, I can't do anything. Mom and dad, you work, like, all I do is this, like, I can't go and see my friends. He's like, he even got upset because he's like, I haven't seen my school friends forever. When am I going to see them next? And we're like, don't worry, like, you will. It's okay, you will.
Yeah.
But
it's very hard for them to be patient, for sure.
Well, yeah, I mean, kids aren't patient, right? They're just not. But
and you hate for them to be worried and scared. I mean, it still seems that they're not at risk much, thank goodness.
Yeah.
And it's funny, I keep hearing the odd report where they're doing some random sampling of populations in other countries, and they'll do a sample where they'll say, a huge percentage, a larger percentage of the population been exposed to it than they've ever imagined.
Yeah.
But again, no symptoms or very mild symptoms.
Yeah.
They also when they look more carefully at the people who have unfortunately passed, that 95, 96% of them have underlying health conditions which contributed to it. And I wouldn't be surprised the 4 or 5% that they've missed, they're not, I'm sure they're not doing careful autopsies.
Well,
there's people walking around with all kinds of conditions that they don't wear a badge saying, I've got this or I've got that.
Yeah.
And they should hide out for sure.
Oh yeah. I mean, like, what, we got maybe another month of this. I don't know if that's the right thing. I have no idea, but I'll tell you this, I'm sick of it. Like, I mean,
I love a good handshake. There's nothing like it. Not everybody has a good handshake, and a non-good handshake isn't worth the effort.
Yeah.
And I don't know why, for the life of us, we don't just do the live long and prosper thing.
There you go.
Not be touching like that.
Yeah.
Unless you are intimate, of course, that's a different.
I guess.
You can always shake the wife's hand, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Good to see you, dear.
Yeah. Brian, if anybody wants to reach out to you, if they're looking to close a deal, if they're on the buyer side, seller side, or need, I guess, even family law, if they need a will, you can also help them with that. How can they reach you?
I think the best way would be my work email. It's just Phillips with 2 L's, PHILLIPS at CohenHighley.com. Oh, wait a minute.
Yeah, there you go. Perfect.
CohenHighley.com. and I'll get back to them pretty quickly. I monitor my email through the day, and if they need something. But we're a fairly full service firm. We do, unfortunately, we'll do family law. We've got like a lot of really grounded, good people, and if you need help, they're the types that will not sort of say, we want to encourage you to go through this for the sake of our pocketbook. They'll take the time to make sure this is the right thing to do. And it almost never is, I think, but still doesn't stop people.
Awesome.
But wills and estate work, and
if somebody needs some litigation,
generally, personal injury, commercial litigation, like you name it, they pretty well do it.
Awesome.
And I can direct them to anybody to help if push comes to shove.
Yeah.
But I appreciate the opportunity, Matt. It's always good to see you. And I'm delighted by your podcast where you used to talk about, I guess you can't get out of the city now and do it. It would seem irresponsible, even though you can still do it.
It would be pretty irresponsible for us
this
to
business
do
or that business and how they're doing this and that. It's really been interesting. And I really love your refreshing approach to things. So keep it up.
We're trying. We have some pretty exciting stuff actually coming in the next month with Licorm, I guess, is kind of like the new, the new business, because we took my personal blog and we pivoted into a new business, but exploring the city. But we've got some pretty exciting announcements coming in the next 3 to 4 weeks, hopefully.
Good. We'll have to look forward to seeing that when it's ready to rock and roll.
Yeah, for sure. But I want to thank you for joining us. Really appreciate this, Brian.
It's a pleasure. And if anything should come up where, I could say a few more words about something or even fewer words about something that might be helpful to your people, by all means, let me know. I'm glad to. I'm stuck here at home.
There we go.
And if you want to reshoot anything, by all means, let me know.
Sounds good.
I do tend to go on sometimes a little too long.
Anyway, this has been fun, but thank you.
Pleasure. You take care and keep well, okay?
Right on. You too.
Bye now.
Bye.